Welcome to Passion for Sound, the channel dedicated to thorough and honest reviews of headphones, earphones, DACs, headphone amps, other components and accessories. Basically everything audio related except power amps and passive speakers. My name's Lachlan and my goal is to explore and discuss all kinds of audio topics, even the controversial ones, to help us all find more enjoyment from music. Thanks for watching and enjoy the video. Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review, and today a look at the TForce Yuan earphones. These are a brand new earphone from a brand new company coming out of China, and they're retailing for $119 US, which is about 160 Australian dollars. Again, that's just a straight conversion. I'm not taking into account different retailers, where you're buying it from, shipping, all that sort of stuff, just a direct conversion from the US dollar amount. Before I get into introducing and reviewing the product, I want to send out a huge thanks, first of all, to Hi-Fi Go for sending me the review units. And so as you're watching this review, if you do feel like you want to buy a pair of Yuan for yourself, I'll put a link down below through to Hi-Fi Go where you can purchase. There's no affiliate links or kickbacks, it's just a way of saying thank you. At the same time though, through a stroke of luck, I was also sent a second pair of Yuan for review, the identical same IEM, and in chatting to Andy from Melbourne Tri-Fi Audio who sent them over, he was very happy for me to provide them as a giveaway here on the channel. So I also want to say a huge thank you to Melbourne Tri-Fi Audio. And therefore what I would say is if you're in Australia, do go and check out Melbourne Tri-Fi Audio, I'll put a link down below, and think about buying from them as a way to say thank you. And then of course, if you want to win a pair of Yuan for yourselves, thanks to Melbourne Tri-Fi Audio, all you need to do is watch this video through. I'm going to put a word on the screen at some point, somewhere during the video. You need to watch this video, see that code for yourself, and put it in the comments down below to put yourself automatically in the draw for a pair of Yuan of your very own. So again, huge thanks to Hi-Fi Go for providing the demo unit and Melbourne Tri-Fi Audio for providing the giveaway unit. Keep an eye for that code and good luck in the draw. I'll be announcing the winner of the draw in 2 videos' time. So now let's start talking about the IEM. Now I should mention I've got some rainbow lorikeets outside the window having a bit of a chat and a squabble and a fight, so if you do hear those I apologise for that. Spring has just sprung here in Melbourne and the birds are all very active as a result. So onto the review and forgiving the rainbow lorikeet sound hopefully. The Yuan have been named after the first emperor of the Tang dynasty in China. The reason for choosing Yuan as the name for this one is that apparently the Yuan represents the first of 3 IEMs that TForce are going to release in time. Now I'm calling it TForce as the brand. I have also seen it referred to as Triforce. I'm not entirely sure which one is the most accurate. Everywhere I've looked, these seem to be listed as TForce, but if you do see listings for Triforce Yuan it is the same IEM as far as I know. And of course, if you take a look at the design of the shells and everything, that'll fairly quickly tell you if it is the same one. The Yuan feature a single dynamic driver per side, and it's a 10mm driver with what they call diamond-like carbon or DLC coating. What that means in practice is a very hard and very smooth surface on the drivers. What that should equate to is driver movement that is very predictable and linear, so the driver's not kind of breaking up with the different frequencies. And the smoothness may slightly improve, I'm guessing, the way the waveform comes off the driver and the general movement of the driver through the air. Obviously, with such tiny movements of something like a 10mm dynamic driver, there may be no benefit at all from the smoothness of the coating, and it might be purely down to rigidity. But I thought I'd mention what the properties of DLC are, so you can have a think about that for yourself. While we're talking about what's inside the ear shells, let's also look at the ear shells themselves. These are one of the most beautifully made budget IEMs I've come across. Not the most beautiful, but one of the most beautiful. They use aluminium shells that are just lightly contoured, so they're not just a boring flat piece. They've got some edges and some curves, but everything is very smooth and comfortable to touch. So even though there's contours and edges, nothing is sharp. They're polished to this bright shine, which is both beautiful but also a fingerprint magnet, so fingerprints do worry you. These might not be a great choice aesthetically speaking, but beyond that, they're really nicely made. They've got this nice little touch of a little bit of colour hint showing through the vent for the dynamic driver, so you can quickly and easily work out which one is left and which one is right by looking at the actual ear shell itself. And then they've got a 2-pin connector to go into the cable. One of the good things about this design is that whilst it is metal, it was so lightweight that I wondered if it was plastic on the back with a metal plate on front. But with further use and playing around and also reading online, it is a full metal case. It's just really, really lightweight, and that's great. So getting the benefits of the longevity and also the comfort of having the metal, but at the same time, you're not having to deal with a very, very heavy IEM. So we've got a beautiful IEM with, in theory, a good quality driver. And then it's important to know what other accessories you're going to get. What I've got here connected to the Yuan Lees is their stock 6N OCC copper cable. So according to the marketing information, this is a high purity copper cable that's got a very conscious and deliberate internal structure to maximize the sound quality. I'm not going to focus on whether I think it is a particularly good cable or not. It's something where it takes a lot of time and thought and comparisons to work out just how good a cable might be. But what I can tell you, and I think what really matters, is that it feels nice to use and the sound quality does appear to be very good. Every now and again I get an IEM and I plug it in and I feel like the cable is holding back the performance. That's certainly not the case with the Yuan Lee, and I've had no feelings that I wanted to change the cable out. It isn't balanced, so if that's something important to you, it is something worth considering, is that this is 3.5mm only. But it is a 2-pin connector IEM, and therefore there are bucket loads of different cable choices you could pair up with the Yuan Lee. Finally, you get a really nice leather case, or maybe fake leather case, to put these in, and it's a good size and a nice shape. It's one of the better cases that I've seen in this price category. So often we're getting the tiny little clamshell zip cases, or we're getting soft fabric pouches that really don't protect the IEMs. So it's nice to see a good sized and what appears to be a fairly protective case for the Yuan Lees. The final accessory in the box is this card with a bunch of tips in it. So what you've got is you've got balanced ear tips over here, you've then got a bass enhancing ear tip here, and foam ear tips on the end. It's nice to see more manufacturers providing a range of tips with their products because it does allow you to tune the IEMs a little bit using the different tips provided. In addition to those tips in the card, the stock tip that comes fitted to the Yuan Lee is one of the bass enhanced tips, and that does always make me think that the manufacturer intends for it to be listened to that way, but I love the fact that they're giving us choices. I will start talking about the differences between the sound of those tips in a moment, but before we get there, I want to talk about the general sound quality straight out of the box using the stock bass enhanced ear tip. And my immediate impression of that exact setup was that these are a very enjoyable IEM. Clarity comes across as being very good without it becoming a treble happy IEM. Many of the IEMs that I'm trying these days, particularly in the chi-fi market, have an overly boosted sense of treble. It produces a very exciting and energetic sound, but it can also mean the IEMs are quite fatiguing. That's going to partly depend on your source and also the music you're listening to, but it can be a bit challenging if you buy an IEM that already tilts that way. It can be very hard to then enjoy all different sources and all different types of music. So I like the fact that the Yuan Lee is a more balanced overall tuning, but at the same time, it does mean it's not going to be as bright and kind of energetic as some other options on the market. And as always, I'll provide some comparisons soon. Now, having said that it's not overly treble happy, I should mention that the tonality to me of the Yuan Lee is probably just ever so slightly enhanced in the upper mids lower treble area. So it's not treble happy, but it's more in that area of vocal presence, a tiny little bit of nasality perhaps, depending on the recording, but it's very, very subtle. So overall, I would describe their tonality as fairly close to true and neutral, but just with that little bit of extra kind of upper mid-range emphasis. Bass extension from these is excellent, particularly at the price, and there's a good sense of it extending all the way down deep into the tracks. The overall bass weight isn't particularly strong, so on some of my test tracks that I use specifically for bass weight, these didn't feel overly punchy or overly full and strong, but I did get the sense that the bass was present and there all the way down the range. For their price, I describe the imaging as being strong. It's not class leading, but it's good and definitely enjoyable. there's a decent amount of separation between the sounds, and the soundstage has a good sense of overall scale. Again, it's not class leading, but at the same time, it's very enjoyable. Transient sounds like the strums of guitars and the hit of drums do have just a little bit of extra energy to give it a bit of sparkle and help with that imaging focus, but at the same time it's not over enhanced to the degree of some of the other IEMs on the market. So overall I would describe the Yuan Li as a fairly kind of subdued version of what you hear in most of the IEMs coming out of the Chinese market. And that's not a bad thing. So when I'm saying it's subdued, or when I'm saying that it hasn't got that level of tuning to really sharply focus an image, what that means is that it's actually going to be probably a more enjoyable listen across a wider range of sources and music. These are an IEM that aren't going to cause you any problems, I don't think, while at the same time delivering very good performance. Until I put them in comparisons directly with other IEMs, I actually thought they might have been class leading. And the reason I say that is to emphasize the fact that when you're buying a pair of IEMs, remember that you're not going to be A/B'ing them. So when someone's giving you comparisons and saying this one's better than this in this way, this one's better than this in the other way, that's helpful from a decision-making point of view, but it's also never going to give you a picture of which one is definitively better. It's giving you a sense of which one you might like more or less, and in which circumstances, and on which tracks. So my point here is that the Yuan Li, if you just buy these, are going to be a highly enjoyable, very well-performing earphone within their price range. As you'll hear me talk about shortly, there are some things they do better than other earphones, and there are other things that other earphones do better, and that's normal. The point now is for you to work out what matters most for you. Before we get to the comparisons though, let me quickly tell you about the sound when you go from the bass enhanced tips over to the balanced sounding tips. And now the way this works, if you haven't watched things like my tip rolling video, the way this works is that the materials that the tips are made out of, and also the wideness of the bore where the sound actually comes through, those two factors combined with how deep the tip allows you to insert the earphone are all going to influence the way the treble, the bass and the mid-range are presented from the earphone. In the case of the Yuan Li, moving over to the balance tips actually in many ways improves their sound in terms of giving them actually more treble but smoother treble. So somewhere I think the bass tip is providing a little bit, or not providing but creating a little bit of distortion or turbulence in the delivery of the treble. Whereas moving over to the balance tips brings a level of smoothness that the bass tips don't have. It's not a big change, but it's definitely there. The result of that increased treble is that in comparison, the bass seems to be slightly reduced in terms of our perception, and the imaging focus does get stronger. So this is an earphone that you can get a slightly varied presentation from just by changing the tips. And don't forget then that there are also other ear tips on the market like spin fits, spiral dots, the X-Elastics, the final audio tips. There are plenty of others that you can try and tune your earphone to your liking. The good news with the Yuan Lis is that the combination of tips provided do show that depending on how you roll the tips, these remain enjoyable and very listenable regardless of the tip you're using. I have had some earphones like the Tin Hi-Fi P2 where they were highly tip dependent to just be enjoyable. That's not the case with the Yuan Lis, they're very enjoyable regardless. And so with all that in mind, let's talk now about a couple of comparisons. When I looked at my collection of IEMs, the most relevant IEMs I had that are current, well-known, and similarly priced to the Yuan Li happen to both be cheaper IEMs compared to the Yuan Li. So whereas this sits at $119 US, my two comparison earbuds today are actually cheaper and both priced at $80 US. But I think they're good comparisons not only in terms of the price being roughly in the same ballpark, but also because they represent exactly the sorts of tuning that I think the Yuan Li has very deliberately and cleverly stepped away from slightly. It's not to say that this is better than those, it's to say that there are now two very good choices, or three technically choices, on the table in front of us. And the first IEM in this comparison is the very well known and very high reputation Moondrop Aria. I reviewed this recently on the channel up against the Cat Ear Mia, and I actually found myself preferring the Cat Ear Mia. despite it being not as well known and also not the most ergonomically enjoyable earphone compared to something that was very good in the Aria. So the Aria here retails for $80 US, making it a full $40 US cheaper than the Yuan Li. The accessories you get with it aren't at the level of the Yuan Li. You're getting a little super tiny puck case, a cable that's okay but it's not great. I do prefer the Yuan Li cable. And then you're also getting very basic tips rather than the selection that the Yuan Li comes with. So in terms of value for money in what you get in the box, there are benefits immediately in the Yuan Li. But of course you're not buying it for what's in the box, you're buying it for how they sound. In returning to re-listen to the Arias after quite some time since my last review of them, I did actually feel that maybe I undersold them in the review. I haven't pulled out the CAD EMEs to double check my impressions and conclusions there, but I certainly thoroughly enjoyed returning to the Arias. Putting the Arias up against the Yuan Lis, it's very obvious straight away just how different their tuning is. The Arias present a much more mid-forward sound, but not in the thickness of the lower mids so much as the forwardness in the upper mid-range. They really bring your attention right onto the vocals, for better and worse. One of the tracks that I put on when comparing these was Going to a Town by Rufus Wainwright. On that track, both of these earphones were very enjoyable. I had no complaints at all. As I've already alluded to, the Yuan Li provided a smoother, enjoyable listen that was a bit more relaxing and probably just a little bit subdued. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but it wasn't trying to be overly flamboyant, overly special in any area. It was just a very kind of level and neutral delivery. And I actually appreciate that about the Yuan Li. Changing to the Aria makes the track instantly more compelling, it draws your attention to the vocals, and it produces a much stronger sense of separation of all the different sounds. Now again, whether that's better or not is a whole nother question. It's definitely more exciting up front, but whether or not in the long term it makes for the more enjoyable IEM, I'm not entirely sure. The risk with something like the Aria is it could become fatiguing sooner, and it's kind of a little bit like if you take a photo or even a video or image on a television and turn the contrast right up. Initially that might really make things pop and be exciting to look at, but in the long run when you return to it time and time again, it actually can get a little bit old and a little bit tiresome. I'm not saying that's exactly what's going to happen with the Aria, it's just something I'm aware of. It's an IEM that to me could become fatiguing more easily depending on, again, the track and the source. I'll tell you about another track in a moment, but I do want to mention that putting the balance tips back on instead of the bass tips did bring the Yuan Li a little bit closer to the sound of the Aria. But I feel like by the time you bring more treble emphasis to the Yuan Lis, you're starting to tread into the area where the Arias are kind of at their best. And so in some ways, if you're drawn to that more kind of treble, upper mid-range focus, hyper-resolving focused sound, then you probably are better off with the Aria rather than the Yuan Li with the treble tips, or the balance tips they're actually called. If you're more after though a more neutral, comfortable, relaxing and still well-resolving sound, then the Yuan Lis might be the better choice. And whilst I try to keep the number of tracks I mentioned in these reviews to a minimum, I did try another couple of tracks just to test out my theory on the fatigue factor of the Aria. Within just a few tracks, I landed on Shame, Shame, Shame by Brian Ferry. And immediately it showed me what I was concerned about with the Aria. On that particular track, which is not overly harsh or bright, but because there's quite a lot of energy up in that upper mid and lower treble range, that's where for me the Aria was now sitting right on the edge of fatigue. It was still a little bit more exciting and engaging to listen to, but at the cost of probably wearing me out after 3 or 4 tracks. The Yuan Li, on the other hand, with the bass tips, I found to still be a very enjoyable and relaxing listen. Not relaxing in the sense that it's boring, but just not overly pushing the details forward. It doesn't get thick or rich or sloppy or anything like that. It's just like it's trying not quite so hard as the Aria is. And that can be both good or bad, as I've already addressed. And so that brought me to my second comparison, putting aside the Arias now, which was the BLON A8 or Orpheus. I'm not sure which one is the primary name, it's named both as far as I can tell, but when you see the glamour video here, you'll recognise the ones I'm talking about. Before I talk about the sound, it is worth noting that the Orpheus or the A8 here are absolutely beautiful looking IEMs. And whilst the Yuan Li look great, they're not quite the ear jewellery that the Orpheus are. Of course, there'll be many people that prefer the more subdued and subtle look of the Yuan Li, and that's great. I'm not suggesting you should ever choose an IEM based purely on the looks. That would be pretty crazy. But both of these are beautiful. Both of them come with very good quality cables, which by the look of them could be out of the exact same factory, but just different materials being used. Both of them are full metal shells, and both use single dynamic drivers. So there's a lot going on here that makes these quite similar. The Orpheus are also only $80 US, the same as the Aria, so they're cheaper than the Yuan Li, but again the accessory set is much more limited. You get a basic set of tips and you get a little soft carry pouch. So once again, with accessories in mind, the Yuan Li do offer better value for money, but also once again, you're buying these for how they sound, not for how they look or the accessories they come with. And so with that in mind, let's talk about the sound of these two. The Orpheus are a much more similar sound to something like the Aria than they are to the Yuan Li. Not that these are poles apart in terms of their sound signatures, all three of these. I would say the Yuan Li is closer to these than something like a really rich and warm-tuned IEM. So they're all roughly in the same ballpark, but the Yuan Li is at the smoother end of the scale, whereas the Aria and the Orpheus are at the brighter, more contrasty end of the scale. During this test, one of the tracks that came on for me was Lullaby by Ben Folds 5. On this track, the Yuan Li was once again a very enjoyable listen that laid out details really nicely and kind of honestly with no sense of tricks. And I don't mean that to sound negative, but there's something that I find in the tuning of earphones like the Aria and the Orpheus. It's almost like they're tricking us into perceiving that they're better than they are. And I don't mean that literally, but there's a certain tuning that at first glance, as I alluded to before, is a bit like turning up the contrast on your TV that makes us go, wow, that's amazing, but in the long run may not actually be as honest and as true to life as we want, and therefore can get fatiguing. So in that sense, the Yuan Li continue to give me the sense that they're being a bit more honest about the music. As a result, the Yuan Li does come across a little bit more tonally accurate, I think, compared to the A8. But the A8 offers this wonderful sense of separation and space in its presentation that goes well beyond what the Yuan Li can do. At the time that I wrote all my notes, and actually even at the time that I'm recording this, I haven't yet done my measurements of these. And so I don't yet know what the graphs that are going to be on screen right now even look like. What I'm hearing though is that the A8s to me sound like they're going to have an upper treble spike somewhere. They've got this really huge sense of space and separation where they kind of pull the music apart and make quite a large expansive space with individual sounds very clearly separated. That's something the Yuan Li can't hope to compete with, but at the same time, it's coming once again at the cost of what sounds like an upper treble spike, and that also therefore sounds like it's going to get a bit fatiguing with extended use and again depending on the source and the tracks. The Orpheus isn't a fatiguing earphone automatically, that's not what I'm saying, but it's one of those that could become fatiguing after extended listening. There are some earphones I put in my ears and I immediately go, yuck, get them out. This is not one of them. My first impressions of the Orpheus is a very enjoyable earphone, but I would be worried about it getting a little bit too hot in the treble over time. The Yuan Li, on the other hand, whilst nowhere near as immediately exciting and engaging as the Orpheus, I did find to be probably the more enjoyable listen for longer periods. That's of course a very personal thing as well. I tend to prefer smoother, slightly warmer sounds. And whilst I wouldn't go as far as saying that the Yuan Li is rich and warm, it's definitely not as treble emphasized and as overly contrasty, you could say, as either of the two earphones in this comparison. Another thing to keep in mind with a presentation like the one from the A8, where it is so large and spacious, is that it can sometimes result in tracks not having the same sense of coherency. So on a track like Lullaby, the A8 took the sound and really pulled it apart. So Ben Folds was in the middle, the piano was spaced away from him, the drums were spaced away, everything sounds really open and spaced out, which isn't entirely natural. If you think about if you're seeing a band live, they're all standing pretty close to one another in most cases. And so whilst it's fun and exciting, and certainly I enjoy the Orpheus a great deal, and I'll be reviewing them very soon, whilst I do find them very enjoyable, it's also not necessarily the most natural listen, and that's again where I think the Yuan Li does have a strong place here. So at this point, how I would sum all this up is that we've got three excellent IEMs here. You really can't go wrong with any of them. I'll cover off in my review of the Orpheus whether I prefer the Aria or the Orpheus. I haven't compared them side by side yet. But in looking at the Yuan Li in this company, what I would say is that they're an excellent earphone that I would personally be very happy to own, and specifically because to me, they're an earphone that you can plug in and just enjoy for long, extended listening sessions. They don't have the technicalities in terms of the separation of sounds and the extent of the soundstage size. They don't match the other two in that regard, but at the same time, what that results in is probably a more natural overall sound. So if you're looking for an exciting, engaging, kind of compelling listen, then certainly the Aria or the Orpheus might be the better choice. But if you're looking for an IEM that is beautiful to look at, beautifully made, well accessorized, and happens to have a sound signature that is great for extended listening with mostly neutral and an honest representation of the sound, then I do think the Yuan Li should be on your list. If it sounds good to you, don't forget the links down below through to Hi-Fi Go to say thank you, and also don't forget to put the code that I showed earlier to get yourself into the draw to win a pair of these for your very own, thanks to Melbourne Chi-Fi Audio. Don't forget that I've got reviews of the Orpheus and a whole bunch of other good stuff coming, so make sure you hit subscribe and like this review if you want to see more reviews like this one. For now though, I'll leave it to the music, so happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.